Well, I am recording, so I want to again formally welcome everyone. Rabbi Daniel Bouskila from Pirkei, Israel. I'm thrilled to be with all of you tonight, this morning here in Israel, to have a discussion, a continuation of our discussions of Pirkei Avot. And I'm going to make a quick refresher of Pirkei Avot and then go straight into teaching a Mishnah of Pirkei Avot, which I think is so important. It's hard to put our finger on saying this is the Mishnah of Pirkei Avot, because every single Mishnah of Pirkei Avot is the Mishnah. But maybe this is the one for this moment. This is the one that we need to remind ourselves of, and then we need to remind the world that our teachings, our sacred teachings, emphasize this from the earliest chapters of the Torah all the way to Pirkei Avot. But let me first again remind everyone,
we see what it looks
because I'm going to bring it and I'm going to specify it to this moment. I'm going to take Pirkei Avot and contextualize it, not just in the context of Jewish history, but in the context of the last 3 months, in the context of the past week. And I'm going to say this: Pirkei Avot is the central text of Jews around the world. When I say the central text, I mean if there is no other text of rabbinic literature that is taught in a Jewish school or in a synagogue, there definitely is Pirkei Avot. It doesn't matter here in Israel whether you go to synagogue or not, you've heard of Pirkei Avot. It doesn't matter where you wear a kippah or you don't, you know what Pirkei Avot is. Pirkei Avot is without a doubt the most quoted, most commonly known text of rabbinic Judaism out there, much more so than any other Talmudic text. Pirkei Avot. Where does Pirkei Avot come from? It's not a book by itself. It's originally located and found in the Mishnah, the same Mishnah that produced the Gemara, Talmudic rabbinic literature. So how is it that Pirkei Avot took a life of its own, right? Many people say, really, I wasn't aware that it's in the Mishnah. So it is originally found in the Mishnah, but what makes it unique and different is that the bulk, if not all of the Mishnah, other than Pirkei Avot, deals with legal matters, what we call in Hebrew the word halacha. Whether it's ritual halacha, like how to pray, how to keep Shabbat, the ritual laws of kashrut, the holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the laws of Pesach, the laws of marriage, the laws of divorce, the laws of family purity, etc. That's the Mishnah, halacha, rituals. And there's also civil law found in the Mishnah, the laws of damages, the laws of courts, the Sanhedrin, the Bet Din. All of this is all in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the first codification of rabbinic law, of Torah law by the rabbis. The 613 commandments were codified into the Mishnah. Within all of that comes a book of Mishnah that deals not with matters of prayer or rituals, how to pray to God, how to keep Shabbat, how to observe kashrut. It doesn't deal with any of that. It deals with what we call ben adam lechavero, how a human being behaves to other human beings. It deals with the behavior of people one towards the other. It deals directly with what we call derech eretz. Derech eretz means manners, values, moral and ethical standards of behavior. This is the Mishnah of Pirkei Avot. And this is why Pirkei Avot became such an important text that it was almost lifted out of the Mishnah and took on a life of its own. Maimonides wrote, the Rambam wrote a commentary to the entire Mishnah, but he wrote a special introduction in that commentary to Pirkei Avot. Follow that? Let me repeat it again. The Rambam, Maimonides, wrote a commentary to the entire Mishnah. He wrote a commentary. He took each line of the Mishnah and explained the halacha. When it came to Pirkei Avot, he wrote a special introduction to his commentary on Pirkei Avot, a very long, famous introduction called Shmona Prakim, where in 8 chapters he describes what is this book? What's it doing in the Mishnah? What is it doing in the Mishnah? Internally for the Jews, the message is being sent that you can't just be a ritual Jew and believe that that's what halakha is. You also have to be a moral and ethically value-based human being. That's also halakha. It's put in the Mishnah on purpose in order to say, while you're learning the details of how many hours to wait between milk and meat, I also want you to learn the details of how to speak to somebody with respect, how to treat somebody properly, how to take control of your own life and make it a better life. This is what Pirkei Avot is. It is a timeless classic. It is a collection of statements that includes so many of the most famous statements and sayings that many of you are all familiar with, that you've all heard. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If not now, when? Say little and do much. Do not speak too much. Actions speak louder than words. All of this comes from Pirkei Avot. I can go on and give you a string of this. Now, as my lead into the Mishnah that I want to discuss with you tonight, I'm going to contextualize it to this moment in Jewish and Israeli history. And that is on October 7th, 2023, which was also Shabbat, which was also here Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, we experienced one of the grossest violations of everything Pirkei Avot says. Everything that Pirkei Avot says was violated by Hamas on October 7th. Meaning, if you want to understand the opposite of Pirkei Avot, look at what happened on October 7th and read everything Hamas says in its charter. Read everything that Hamas's leaders, from the most simple, basic terrorist all the way up to the highest echelon, read the fact that they continue to this day to hold a baby who just turned a year old and has been in captivity for close to 3 months. A baby continues to be held hostage. Women, children, elderly, people who are ill. An unprecedented situation in modern day history, in global history. Certainly unprecedented for the IDF to deal with a situation of having to go in to enemy territory, knowing that we had 200 plus of our own men, women, and children, innocent civilians, stuck in tunnels in the worst of conditions. So if you want to understand the opposite of what I'm about to teach, just look at what happened on October 7th, all the way till now with the hostages being held, all the way till now with the manner of warfare of Hamas, which is to use hospitals, which is to use homes, private homes. I don't say this in theory. I say this as a fact. I know it firsthand from the little that my own son has shared with me about what he saw when he was in Gaza and the hospitals. As a matter of fact, if you saw the opening arguments on Friday, the opening arguments on Friday of the Israeli defense team, the team that is called upon to defend Israel in The Hague, in the International Court of Justice, the lawyer talked about the fact that Hamas are actually the ones committing atrocities. Hamas are actually the ones who are using innocent civilians as shields. And what did that lawyer show? What did she show? A young lawyer, brilliant young woman. What did she show? She showed a video of a terrorist shooting an RPG missile from a hospital. When I saw that, I said, wow, I'm proud of Elon and his group. Why? Because if you remember back a couple of months ago, I sent you a link to that very video that went viral. It was shown on Fox, on CNN, all over the place. That video was videotaped by a drone operated by Elon's unit. Elon's unit caught that video with the drone that they operate, sent it to the IDF spokesman's office. And just this past Friday morning here, I was watching the hearing, and about 10 minutes later, Elon came in to my home and he said, I told him, Elon, you have to see the video that you guys took. It's part of the defense team of Israel in The Hague. And 5 minutes later, in his chat group that he has with his unit, with all the soldiers, his commander sent a link to the defense team and from the television what the defense lawyer attorney for Israel was saying. And he said, look, guys, we even made it to the International Court of Justice. Look what we did. Why did they take these videos? Why? To show the world that not only is Israel not committing mass crimes and atrocities, but quite the opposite. It is Hamas who uses hospitals, women, children, and their own so-called own civilians as human shields. Yet Israel is being accused of creating genocide, of acting in a genocidal way. And with all of this, remember one thing, Pirkei Avot hovers over all of this. Why? Because that attorney who made her presentation, the brilliant Professor Shaw from Hebrew University who made the opening statements, Judge, Supreme Court Justice Aharon Barak, who was chosen to sit on the tribunal on behalf of Israel, every IDF commander, every IDF soldier, men and women from all walks of life, all of them have studied Pirkei Avot. It's part of the curriculum of Israeli schools. It's part of the jargon in Israeli society. And I want to teach one Mishnah tonight that will exemplify what is the ethic of the IDF. Did you know, by the way, that the IDF has a book that every single soldier receives upon day one of their induction to the IDF? It's a small little booklet called Musar Tzahal, the IDF Code of Ethics. There is a code of ethics that has been drawn up by a special committee for every IDF soldier to read, and it's taught to them. It includes what we call Tohar HaNeshek, the purity of the weapon. What is the appropriate way to use a weapon? And what is the inappropriate way to use a weapon? I wonder if at some point during these hearings in The Hague, in the International Court of Justice, somebody is going to ask Hamas, can you show us the Hamas Code of Ethics that was written? Where is it? I'd like to see a copy. I'd like to compare the IDF Code of Ethics and the Hamas Code of Ethics. If you go to CVS on the corner or Walgreens, and you go and you purchase a blank pad of paper, blank with nothing inside of it, that's the Hamas Code of Ethics. Just look through a blank pad of paper, that's the Hamas Code of Ethics, okay? Their code of ethics is to do what they did on October 7th, to murder women and children, to rape elderly people, and to take 200 plus civilians, including babies, as hostages. This is who Israel is being accused against of being genocidal. So now I want to read to you a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah that every Israeli knows. It's a Mishnah that's taught to every IDF soldier. It's perhaps one of the less quoted Mishnayot of Pirkei Avot in America, for whatever reason. But I promise you, you've all heard this idea, because if you haven't read Pirkei Avot, you have read the Bible, you have read the Torah, and you have heard about the creation of the world, and you have heard about the creation of human beings. And when we read the story of the creation of the world in the beginning, we read about the fact that God created the sun and the moon and the stars and the oceans and the trees and the plants and the flowers and the animals. When we get to day 6, the Torah suddenly does something unique. Everything else that was created, it simply says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God said, let's create. When God said, let there be water on the ground to divide between heaven and earth, and there so it was. And that's the cycle of the description of the creation. Only one entity from creation is described differently: human beings. And I say human beings, not Jews, because the first 11 chapters of the Torah that include the creation story do not talk about Jewish people. It talks about human beings. Their name are Adam and Chava. And it says, at the very beginning, before they were given names, God said, like this, I'll read to you the verse. We have a whole cycle of creation that's described, and suddenly it says, Vayomer Elohim, and God said, Naaseh Adam b'tsalmenu kidmutenu. Let us create man in our image, the image of God. Tselem Elohim. And then it says, Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam. And God created human beings. B'tsalmo, in his image. B'tselem Elohim bara oto. Man was created in the image of God. Zachar u'nekeva bara otam. They were created male and female. That means suddenly something changed. The relationship between a human being and God is different than the relationship between a tree and God. Human beings have a different status in the creation cycle. Why? Because God, the creator of all things, when it came to creating human beings, it suddenly says that they were created in his image. Now, what the word in God's image means, more ink has been spilled over that by Jewish thinkers and philosophers than perhaps by any other idea. But what it does mean is this, that there is a special relationship between God and human beings. Now, Pirkei Avot says, Rabbi Akiva is quoted. Rabbi Akiva haya omer, Rabbi Akiva said, Chaviv Adam, beloved are human beings, shenivra b'tselem. Why? God loves human beings more than anything else that God created, more than animals, plants, trees, oceans, flowers, birds. All that's gorgeous, but God loves human beings more because they were created in his image. Chaviv Adam shenivra b'tselem. Chiba yetera nodat lo. An additional element of love was given to a human being over anything else. Why? Shenivra b'tselem. Because human beings were created in the image of God. Now, we have no idea what that means yet, but we're given a hint a little bit later in the book of Genesis, not far away, a few chapters away. When is the next time that the idea that a human being was created in God's image, when does that next come up? Here's the first indication we have, and it's going to directly relate now to Israel in Gaza and the war that they're fighting and the way in which they're fighting the war. Listen carefully. We could say God created human beings in the image of God, and that means X, Y, Z. You could do that. But the Torah suddenly puts, if I may say, an accent on it. When? Remember what happened in the creation story. God created human beings and then got disappointed with them. The same human beings that God created, God got disappointed with them. Why? Because Who were the first human beings to walk the face of the earth? Adam and Eve? No, they're not the first human beings to walk the face of the earth. The first human being to walk the face of the earth, like you and I, were the children of Adam and Eve, right? Because Adam and Chava, in chapter 2 of the Torah, it's described how they were created. They were not born of a mother and father. God took earth from the ground and shaped Adam and breathed life into Adam. That's Adam. He was born an adult, as far as we know. He had no childhood. He never went through all of the difficulties of being born. According to the Midrash, Adam was created as a 40-year-old human being. Imagine, fast forward straight to 40. Okay, this is what the Midrash says. The Torah doesn't tell us anything except that human beings were created by God, the first human being. And then, of course, we know the famous story when God said, it's not good for this human being to be alone. I'm going to create a partner and put him to sleep and perform the first operation. He took a little piece of Adam and created Chava. If all of you look back, even if you don't remember being born, the last you knew, your parents didn't tell you, how did you come into this world? Because God shaped you, or God put your father to sleep and created your mother. That's not what happened. We are all the product of human beings procreating. Who are the first children who are actually human beings like you and I? The children of Adam and Chava. Who were they? Cain and Hevel. What is their claim to fame? Cain and Abel. Jealousy between brothers. And the first human being, Cain, was the firstborn. Cain was the firstborn. And what does the Torah tell us about the firstborn human being to ever walk the face of the earth? That he was a scholar? No. That he was a teacher? Hardly. What was he? A jealous brother who murdered his brother. A pretty grim thought. God looks at the world and says, human beings left alone will murder. It's the instinct of a human being. The nature of a human being, the Torah says, Yetzer lev ha'adam ra minu ra. The inclination of a human being from childhood is towards evil. That's how we're programmed and hardwired. Why were we created that way? I don't know. We have to ask God. But God said, perhaps we need to fix this by creating sets of rules. So at first, God said, this generation is hopeless. Remember what it said. When God brought a flood upon the world, what did it metaphorically say in Hebrew? The world was filled with violence and corruption. Anybody know the Hebrew word in the Torah? That's not what this word means in Arabic. But in Hebrew, what is the word for violence and corruption used there? It says, and the world was filled with violence and corruption. The word is Hamas. Vatimaleh haaretz Hamas. So the world was filled with Hamas, violence and corruption. This is in the beginning of Parashat Noach. Okay? God brings a mabul, a flood. All of humanity could have been wiped out, minus one person. His name was Noach. Noach starts humanity again upon leaving the ark. When Noach leaves the ark and is commanded to repopulate the earth and to say, let's try this again, that first generation failed. The generation of Noach, God tells them, round 2, let's try it again. What does God say to Noach? God says to Noach, Shofech dam ha'adam be'adam damoy shafech. One who takes a life of a human being is guilty of murder. Why? Ki b'tselem Elohim asai ha'adam. So here we have an indication that when somebody commits murder, what is it that we're doing? We are, in a way, killing God. or a piece of God. We're diminishing the power of God in the world by committing murder. Meaning here it says, for the very first time since that mysterious opening chapter where God suddenly says, I'm going to create human beings in my image. We don't know what that means. Suddenly now God says to Noach, Lo tirtzach, don't commit murder, because if you do, remember, by spilling the blood of another human being, like Cain did to Abel, what you're doing is you're affecting the power of God in the world. Human beings are created in the image of God. Every time murder is committed and bloodshed is committed, there is a diminishment of the power of God in the world. Okay, so that means that this unique relationship, Chaviv Adam, human beings are considered beloved because they were created in the image of God, takes on a halacha that later becomes part of the 10 Commandments. Lo tirtzach, not commit murder. And why not commit murder? We come back here to chapter 9 of the book of Genesis. Why? Because by committing murder, you're taking away a piece of God. Everybody has a piece of God inside of it. Now, I want to read to you a commentary. Today I was in Jerusalem. I went to my office at the Sephardic Educational Center. There I also have a small library of books and a small office. And I took this book off of the shelf. It is the commentary to Pirkei Avot, written by none less than Rav Ovadia Yosef, one of the great Sephardic Chachamim of the 20th century, one of the great Chachamim of all time. Brilliant. And here in his commentary on this Mishnah, I want to share with you what he says. It says, look at the way he connects the dots. Chaviv Adam shenivra b'tzelem. Beloved is man. Beloved are human beings. Beloved are men and women because they were created in the image of God. Rav Ovadia Yosef says, what is the proof to that? From where do we know that? Not because it says, because God created you in the image, like the first verse with creation. He says, that's not the verse that proves how much God loves human beings. The verse that proves how much God loves human beings is the second time it's mentioned. He says, the hara'aya, the proof to the fact that Chaviv Adam, that human beings are beloved because they were created in the image of God. The proof to that is in the verse that says, he who takes a life is liable for murder. Why? Ki b'tzelem Elohim asai et ha'adam. Why? That verse about don't commit murder because you're taking out a piece of God, that's what shows God's unique love and relationship to human beings. Now, Rav Ovadia Yosef emphasizes, I want to continue. Think about the International Court of Justice, so-called. Think about all the accusations of Israel and against IDF soldiers. And Ovadia Yosef says on this Mishnah that the fact that God says, don't commit murder because human beings are created in the image of God. God says, for those who read this as meaning that only applies to Jews. Okay? Wrong. He says it applies to all human beings. He says, Mikan shegam al bnei Noach shayechet. He says, this is in the generation of Noach. This is to all human beings. What was the generation of Noach? Humanity. Not Jews, not Christians, not Muslims. Humanity. And he goes on to quote another rabbi, Rav Yom Tov Liefman Heller, the Tosfot Yom Tov, who says, Hochiach v'siem sheze lo ke'eze mefarshim shekadvu she'en ze ela l'Yisrael hanikraim adam. He says, there are some who erroneously read this and say only Jewish people are called Adam. No, everyone is called Adam. I'm going to tell you a story, okay? You know, I mentioned this in another Zoom class for those who were on my Agnon class this week, but I'm going to mention it again. If you haven't yet been in Los Angeles to the Wall in Culver City, for the hostages, please go and visit. There's this magnificent big wall display in Culver City on the corner of Washington Place and Washington Boulevard, a massive mural that is so impressive. If I was in Los Angeles, I would have had a rally. I would have held a rally at that wall. I don't understand why it hasn't been done. Okay, it is so powerful. It was created in a way, by the way, that it is not possible to tear the posters down, nor is it possible to graffiti them. They created the posters out of a material that cannot be torn and that has an anti-graffiti, resists graffiti. And it is a magnificent, it was the first time when I was there on New Year's Day last week. My sister took me to see it. For me, it was the first time that I saw those images outside of Israel. I've been in Israel since October 7th, and everywhere we turn, we see those posters all over the place. You see them also online, you've seen them all the exhibits and in Los Angeles, all over. For me, coming from Israel, driving in LA, and suddenly seeing this huge wall, wow, amazing. Go and visit. Now, right a block away from that wall, okay, is a mosque in Culver City. I was once invited to speak at the mosque with a panel, an interfaith panel. 500 people were present. I want to tell you my experience of what happened there. It sounds like a joke, like the stereotype of a Jew, a Christian, a Muslim walk into a room. This is what it was. We were a Jew, a Christian, a Catholic, and a Muslim. A panel of 4. Rabbi, a priest, a minister, and not an imam. There was a woman who represented the Muslim Public Affairs Council. You've probably seen her on television. The Muslim Public Affairs Council is the same organization that on September 11th on television in the afternoon accused Israel to be behind September 11th. It's the Muslim Public Council, whatever it's called. Why they brought her to represent Islam, I'm not sure. She came with hijab and so on. Here were the rules of the game. The rules were that each panelist is going to make an opening presentation, not to be responded to by the others. The responses would come afterwards. Let each panelist speak for 2-3 minutes opening, right? No questions from the audience, no response from the other panelists about the opening remark. And from there, we'll have a conversation. That was the rule. So it came my turn. And here's what I said. I said, you know, we always start these interfaith panels by talking about we're the children of Abraham, right? I said, that always seems to be, we try to draw that in common. We're all the children of Abraham, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. I said, maybe that's where we get stuck, because we're all opening a debate and saying, did Abraham sacrifice Isaac or Ishmael? According to the Torah, it was Isaac. According to the Quran, it's Ishmael. Jesus, was he the sacrifice? You know, so I said, maybe that's our problem. I said, maybe for today, what I'd like to offer is something different. Could we, you know, Abraham appears in chapter 12 of the Bible. That's where we first meet him. I said, maybe we can back up 11 chapters to the beginning of the Torah and talk about the fact that we were all created in the image of God as human beings. That's what I was taught. That's the Mishnah I'm teaching you. Chaviv Adam shenivra b'tzelem. Human beings. God loves human beings because we were created in the image of God. And as Rav Ovadia Yosef points out, that doesn't mean Jews. That means human beings. Adam and Chava, Cain and Hevel, they were not Jewish, Christian, Muslim. That's what I said. I said, let's start from that point. Maybe we could have a better conversation today as children of human beings, not as Muslims, Christians, and Jews. People in the audience applauded, that's amazing, etc. Came turn for the Muslim representative, and here's what she did. Immediately violates the rule and says, I'm sorry, I know that the rule is that we cannot respond to what the opening panelist said, but I have to. I'm compelled to, because I cannot accept what the rabbi just said. Because according to our Islamic tradition, Adam and Eve were the first Muslims. Now, let that sink into your mind for a moment. What that means is that according to the tradition of Islam that she quoted, if Adam and Eve are the first human beings, if we accept that as being the story we're going to go with, Adam and Eve are the first human beings, and they were Muslims, that means all descendants of Adam and Eve are Muslims. And if you're not, you either are an infidel and are committed, and jihad should be committed on you, or you can convert. Take your choice. So I sat there, I looked and listened to what she said. This is the way she responded. She said, the whole world, we are all descendants of Adam and Eve were Muslims. So I responded back. I said, may I respond? Since she already responded, could I respond back? He let me. I said, you know what that means? What my respected colleague here on the panel is saying. That means that if Adam and Eve were Muslims, that myself and my co-panelists here are in violation of the genealogy. Because I'm Jewish, my colleagues here are Christian and Catholic. I don't know if any of you plan on converting to Judaism, or are we going to have jihad committed on us? What I do know is that since you believe that all of us are Muslims or should be Muslims, this interfaith panel is, for all intents and purposes, as far as I'm concerned, over. And I'm going to excuse myself and say, have a nice afternoon. And I'm leaving. And I got up to walk away. And the moderator, no, please sit down. I apologize. To sit down for what? To discuss what? Why I'm an infidel, or why jihad should be committed on me? That's what she just said, isn't it? Think about that. This belief of not accepting others, of saying that there's an absolutism. Judaism does not view life that way. Maimonides does not view life that way. Judaism says, Maimonides actually says, Christianity and Islam, they've brought a lot of tzarot, a lot of problems on us. But maybe they developed as another path to monotheism. I don't know. It's strange, but it's brought a lot of people closer to monotheism. Maybe a strange kind of monotheism that uses that monotheism as an excuse to murder others, whether it's Christianity with Inquisition, with pogroms, and with expulsions and so on, right? They use the accusation of deicide as a means of murdering Jews. Let's not forget that, okay? The Easter celebration and Christmas celebrations were once upon a time not about bunny rabbits and Santa Claus. They were about reminding the world that the Jews are responsible for the death of Christ. And we know that those were considered amongst the most dangerous nights for Jews to walk out. What Islam has done with that, whether the panelists on that Sunday, a block away from now, where there's a wall with 200 pictures, plus pictures of hostages that were taken captive by fundamentalist Muslims, what are they doing exactly to the baby? Are they converting that baby now to Islam? Is that the reason why they're holding a 1-year-old child? Is that the justification? Because the baby was born Jewish in Israel, and it was a mitzvah to capture a 10-month-old child to convert that baby to Islam? Is that the justification? Why do we not hear anything about that in the Hague, in the International Court of so-called Justice? And so here, this story of Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem, okay, human beings were created in the image of God. And the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva says, this is the same Rabbi Akiva whose most famous, favorite line, whose the principle of the whole Torah was, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love of human beings, love of one another. And Rav Ovadia Yosef quotes multiple sources to say this does not mean only Jews. It means human beings. Now translate that into warfare. Translate that into young IDF soldiers, 18 years old, all the way to those who are fathers and mothers, men and women who are fighting in the worst of conditions. When I say worst of conditions, it's not because Gaza is necessarily the worst terrain that's ever been fought. In World War II, there was much more difficult terrain than Gaza. Gaza is not necessarily difficult terrain because of that. It's difficult because it's so densely populated, it's so narrow, and it's filled with civilians. It's filled with civilians, and you're fighting not an army, but you're fighting a terrorist organization that has no qualms of using those civilians as human shields. And this is the dilemma that faces every IDF soldier. I want to talk about something else for a moment. And again, when I said, if you want to read the Hamas Code of Ethics, I told you that every IDF soldier receives a little booklet on the first day that they're inducted. It's a little booklet that says IDF Code of Ethics. You know what that Code of Ethics is? It's the Pirkei Avot of the IDF. It's the Pirkei Avot of the IDF. It tells IDF soldiers from an ethical and moral standpoint what's considered the way to engage the enemy, what's considered appropriate, inappropriate, how not to violate the code of ethics of human beings, how to not violate that. This is the IDF that's being now accused of genocide by South Africa, of all countries. That's being accused of racism and genocide by one of the most corrupt regimes in the history of humanity, the apartheid regime and this one. I'm not sure which one was more corrupt, the one that was the actual apartheid government or the one that replaced it. The point is, they have no moral voice whatsoever, or gravitas, to accuse anyone of anything, okay? And I told you, if you want to read the Hamas Code of Ethics that every Hamas, quote unquote, soldier receives upon being drafted into Hamas, okay? Just walk to CVS or Walgreens and buy one of those blank pads of paper where you would write scribble notes, and just leaf through that blank pad of paper from the beginning to the end, and you'll read Hamas Codes of Ethics. There it is, in a blank pad of paper, okay? But I want to tell you about something else. One of the biggest problems, and follow me on this and you'll understand where I'm going. One of the biggest problems facing Israeli society today, post October 7th, both for the civilians that were traumatized by what happened on October 7th, for those who survived those mass atrocities on that day, and for the soldiers who have had to go into Gaza, like my son, like many, many others, those who are young, okay? I mentioned this to some people a couple of hours ago, okay? Ilan is a veteran of IDF service. He has done now a year of Mechina college. He is now in the second year of law school. He's married and he's a veteran of a war. And on Thursday, he turns 24. He's a baby, okay? 24 years old, all right? He's just beginning his life. He's a child in human years, okay? Anyone like that, all the way up to fathers and mothers who are parents of children, grandchildren in certain cases, who have been fighting in this war, are coming back traumatized. PTSD is one of the biggest problems this country is today facing. Now, I want you to connect why that's important to this conversation. Why are they traumatized? So you could give the simple answer and say, war is traumatic, it's frightening, you're in danger, people are shooting at you, your comrades were injured, were killed. That's not the most common definition of PTSD amongst soldiers. The most common definition of PTSD amongst Israeli soldiers is when they were forced to be put into positions that in their own mind forced them to do things that they otherwise would not want to do because of the enemy that they're fighting. Meaning, they would like to fight a war that's conventional. And when Israeli soldiers have to go into homes knowing that there are women and children there, whether those women and children are innocent civilians or not, whether they voted for Hamas, let's put all that aside. When you know that you're going to walk away from Gaza 3 weeks later, and perhaps you took the lives of babies. It doesn't matter which babies. You can't go home and say, well, I walked into a home where I knew there were 4 terrorists there and they had caches of weapons. And in doing so, I shot a 3-year-old girl and a 10-month-old boy. Well, he was destined to be raised to be the next Hamas terrorist. And you can't say that. For the rest of your life, you're going to walk around saying, I killed children. There was a woman sitting there in her kitchen and they were making coffee, and my machine gun put 20 bullets through her. That's PTSD. I want to ask you the question. Are there trauma centers being set up right now in Gaza for Hamas soldiers? Are they traumatized by anything they've done? Do they consider themselves traumatized for what they did on October 7th? If they come in and try to do it again, if they've killed young Israeli soldiers, we have almost 190 soldiers that have been killed fighting Hamas just in the ground war, let alone all those that were lost the first day on October 7th. It amounts to close to 600 IDF soldiers that were killed in this war. How many of the Hamas terrorists are PTSD'd by that? How many trauma centers are being built in Gaza City right now? 0. Why? Because of that blank book that you bought at Walgreens, right? Where there is no code of ethics, the code of murder and violence. This is what we're dealing with. The Mishnah says, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tzelem. God has a special relationship with human beings because God created human beings in the image of God. The Torah continues and says, anybody who takes a life of a murderer, murders, right? Kills, spills innocent blood in a cold way, that's considered violating this. Now, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef does continue, and he says, who's included in Tselem Elohim? Watch. It's unbelievable. It's like Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was writing in this commentary to Pirkei Avot, a doctrine of fighting Hamas. He says, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tzelem. Human beings are more dear to God than anything else God created because they were created in the image of God. God has a personal relationship with them, more so than with trees, more so than with birds. Those are all beautiful, but human beings, that's a piece of God in there. Human beings are there as their piece for God. Now, Ovadia Yosef says that's not Jews, that includes all human beings. But he then says, who's not included? En harisha'im bichlal zeh. But evil people are not included in this. It's almost as if Ovadia Yosef said, okay, Ilan and your unit, you're entering Gaza. You've got a landscape filled with people. Within there are some very evil people, known as Hamas terrorists. Your goal is to go in and kill them. If you kill Hamas terrorists, not only are you not PTSD, not only have you not violated any code of ethics, but you've committed a mitzvah. You shall eliminate evil from the world. The goal of every IDF soldier in Gaza was not to go in and harm any civilian. It was to simply dismantle and destroy a terrorist organization, not only because of what it did on October 7th. That was the tipping point. That was the tip of the spear. But it's not the whole reason. It's because of what they continue to represent in the world, in their region, in their city, in their territory, and in this region. And this is the world of what needs to be represented to the world. These words, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tzelem. Human beings are beloved because they were created in the image of God. When Hamas terrorists crossed the Israeli border the morning of October 7th, they had one thing in mind when they had their finger on the trigger: random, complete murder and violence. They celebrated this. They called their parents and said, look how many Jews I've killed. They called their imams and asked them for a permission to rape women. We have proof of this in phone conversations that were recorded where they sent messages on WhatsApp to their imam asking them a quote halachic question. Is it permitted for me now to rape this woman in the name of Islam? And the response came, yes, it's a mitzvah. This was the code of ethics of Hamas crossing the border. When Israeli soldiers crossed the border in the other direction, they went not only with the Israeli book of ethics that is given to them by the IDF, but they went with this Mishnah in their heads. Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem. Every human being is beloved. You're there to destroy an enemy, not to destroy a population. This is the world of Judaism, the world of ethics, morals, and values. That's why Pirkei Avot is the most studied book of all the Mishnah. That's why it's taken on a life of its own. That's why if there are certain books, if I were to quote you any other section of the Mishnah or of the Talmud, right, I would need to be where I was today in the old city of Jerusalem to be able to bump in on the street and stop somebody. Most of the people in the old city of Jerusalem happen to be religious people who live there, many of whom are yeshiva students studying, many of whom come from learned backgrounds in Torah. So I'm pretty sure that if I walk through the old city of Jerusalem and I stop somebody and I say, have you read the Mishnah in Mesechet Baba Kama that says, they'll say, I know what that is. Or, yeah, of course I studied that. Did you read this morning's Daf Yomi, the daily page of Talmud? After Minyan, when we study a daily page of Talmud, did you read this morning's Daf Yomi? Chances are that many of them will be answering yes. If I also ask them about Pirkei Avot, of course they've heard of that too. If I had the same conversation about the ritual sections of the Talmud, where I was yesterday, in what I call the Kotel of Tel Aviv, the hostage square, Kikar Chatufim, and I bump into most people there and ask them, did you read this morning's page of Talmud on that? They would say, no. I'd say, no, I'm not religious. I don't do that. But if I stopped any of those people in hostage square, any of them, and I said, did you read the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that says, if I'm not for myself, which of course I grew up with that. It's part of the library of my home. My family wasn't religious at all, but we had one book on the shelf of the rabbis. That was Pirkei Avot. Have you ever heard of the Mishnah, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem? Human beings are beloved because they were created in the image of God. Of course, this is how we were raised. This is how my parents raised us. Again, we weren't the most observant people. We didn't keep Shabbat. Pesach was not kept strictly in our home. I had my father ate on Yom Kippur. He didn't go to synagogue. But this, Pirkei Avot, Derech Eretz Kadma L'Torah, this was the book in our home. Every Israeli knows that. That's why here in this country, in addition to there being Rav Ovadia Yosef's commentary here, there are also many, many, many commentaries to Pirkei Avot written by secular Israelis, Chilonim. Why have they taken a liking to this book? Because it's the national identity of the Jewish people. When we say the world holds us to another standard, there's a reason why the world can get away with doing that. Because the first to hold the Jewish people to another standard are the Jewish people. We hold ourselves to another standard. That's what's so infuriating when we do everything we can. We put our own soldiers into danger sometimes in the name of morals and ethics. It's a big debate in this country all the time, right? Why are we doing what we have to do? Just go in and indiscriminately murder and kill and do what we have to do, right? We're always so careful in every one of these wars, every one of these missions, every one of these operations in order to minimize human casualties on both sides and to say our goal is not to amass up dead bodies of women and children and non-combatants, but to eliminate Hamas. And the same Hamas that's using hospitals and homes and nursery schools and kindergartens and grocery stores as their stronghold and having the chutzpah to use their own people supposedly as human shields. When Israel has sent, if you need no other proof of the derech eretz of Israelis, when Israel has sent humanitarian aid in a humanitarian corridor in order to help the civilians, and we've then seen Hamas co-opt and violate that by taking all of that away. Where is Tselem Elohim as far as they're concerned? There who are fighters. You know, most Israeli soldiers, when they walk in, they don't use the term any longer, Tselem Elohim, the image of God. The Hebrew term that most Israelis use to say we have to remember that every human being is a human being, meaning innocent ones, not violent combatants like Hamas, terrorists, okay? They don't use the term Tselem Elohim. They use the term Tselem Enosh, right? The image of a human being. That a human being is holy whether you believe in God or not, right? Many Israeli soldiers who walk into Gaza do not fight in the name of God and do not even believe in God, but they believe in values, they believe in ethics, they believe in morals, and they say that is the flag of the Jewish people, is morals, values, and ethics. Hamas, who claims to fight in the name of God, they claim to come in the name of the Quran, in the name of Adam and Eve is a Muslim, in the name of jihad, of holy war. These terms are used by them wholesale basis every single time. That's what we hear. Where's their Tselem Enosh? Yet it's Israel that's on trial. Is the world making sense? It's Israel that's being put on trial. Does the world make sense? I don't need to be a lawyer in the international court to make this presentation. I don't need to be a rabbi who reads Pirkei Avot and the commentary of Avad Yosef. I just need, as we say in Hebrew, la'af'il et hasechel, to just apply a little bit of common sense. Okay, and I ask all of you, like I've done in videos and in messages, please, 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 okay, take this material, look this Mishnah up. It's in chapter 3 of Pirkei Avot. Depending on which version you're using, the Mishnayot are divided differently. Anything from Mishnah 14 to 18, somewhere over there, some of the editions of Pirkei Avot divide this Mishnah differently. But it's in chapter 3. Okay, it's based on a teaching of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the one who said this. Use this, okay? Post on your Instagram and Facebook and anywhere else. Write to your congressmen, to your senators, to the president, to the UN, to wherever you're writing, and quote this Mishnah and say, look, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem. This is who we are. This is who every Israeli is. I'll conclude with this story. There is a investigative reporter here in Israel. She is, like the Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes of Israel. Her name is Ilana Dayan. She is considered like the preeminent investigative reporter on television. She has a show called Uvda. She's very well respected here in this country. She was in Gaza the first couple of weeks. She was actually taken in with a tank unit into Gaza with bulletproof vest and helmet, and she accompanied the soldiers during their missions of warfare. And she interviewed there, amidst all the rubble and the ruins, what was going on there. She interviewed a battalion commander, a young man who was maybe 30, 32 years old, okay? And she asked him several questions, including this. She asked him, what do you see happening the day after? Meaning, once this war is over, what do you see happening here in Gaza? And he said, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. That's a political question. It's not for me to decide. It's not for me to speak that right now here. That's a question that the government is going to have to decide what's going to be the future. We're here as soldiers on operations and missions to destroy Hamas, to root out terrorism. That's all I can answer. In uniform, I can't answer such questions. So she pushed him and she said, okay, in your mind, take your uniform off for a moment. What do you think? You as a private civilian, if you can for a moment, tell us. You know what he responded? Standing amidst all of this warfare, amidst terrorists who were shooting at his own soldiers. You know what he said? He goes, Ani ish shalom. I'm a person of peace. And he said, I want nothing more for all of this to go away and for us to go back to our homes and for the civilians here to live their lives and for us to live our lives. We're here not to destroy their lives or not to kill them. We're here to root out terrorism, Hamas specifically, and other terror groups, but especially Hamas. We're here to do that so that we could live a more quiet life in Israel, and the people here can live a more quiet life here. That's why we're here. Where did he get that idea? From Pirkei Avot. I promise you, he was raised learning these Mishnayot in his home, in whatever school he attended. He was raised with these values and these ethics. So when you're writing or debating Israel, if you're out at a rally or something, I know it's tempting to say, you read this in the New York Times, I'm going to give you a column in the Wall Street Journal instead. You read this in this paper in England, I'm going to give you something that I read in the Times of Israel. If you really want to be Jewish, say, you say all of this in the court of justice and this and that against Israel, I'm going to give you Pirkei Avot. Because behind the Jewish ethic, the lawyers that are representing Israel, Aharon Barak himself, the most preeminent judge and legal mind in Israel's short but long 76-year history, a Holocaust survivor, a brilliant legal mind. If you read his legal decisions, the many legal decisions he made, they include many times quotes from Pirkei Avot, right? He was the one who drafted a law that talked about what? The respect of a human being. What was it called? Chok Kvod Ha'adam. The law that talks about how to respect a human being. Think about that. Where did he get that from? Rabbi Akiva. It's a long chain of tradition that continues to this day, irrespective of whether somebody wears a kippah or calls themselves religious. This is the book that's the anchor of our identity as Jews, Pirkei Avot. That's why it's the only book in the whole Mishnah that took a life of its own. It's the only book of the Mishnah that has a ritual to it. We read it between Pesach and Shavuot. I mentioned this in my earlier classes before we took a break from them. The original Pirkei Avot is divided into 5 chapters. Somebody decided and said, wouldn't it be nice between Pesach and Shavuot, every Shabbat in the afternoon, to read and study a full chapter of Pirkei Avot? The problem is, watch Jewish creativity. The problem is that there's 5 chapters of Pirkei Avot originally. And how many Shabbatot are there between Pesach and Shavuot? 6. So they said, wow, that would have been a nice idea, but we can't do it. And somebody said, no. I'm going to invent a 6th. Let's make up a 6th chapter so that it fits. And they created a chapter 6 of Pirkei Avot that's now part of every Pirkei Avot book. It has a unique focus. It's called Perek Kinyan HaTorah, the chapter on how to acquire the Torah, right? Because it's the Shabbat right before Shavuot when we accept the Torah. But stop and think about the custom of saying, when we left Egypt, what's the experience between Pesach and Shavuot? We left Egypt and we're preparing ourselves to come to Mount Sinai and read the Torah. What's the best way of preparing ourselves to receive the Torah again on Shavuot? By studying that human beings have a special relationship with God because they were created in the image of God. And by studying all of these gems of wisdom, it's the oldest book of morals and ethics in the world. It stood the test of time, thousands and thousands of commentaries, and it continues to form and shape the identity and the ethics of all IDF soldiers that are in Gaza right now. Don't ever forget that in your conversations with anyone who's trying to delegitimize or defame Israel. Whether it's lawyers in the criminal court or your neighbor or somebody you bump into, somebody who sees you wearing the dog tag, I commented, think about this. It's now, we talk about Hollywood. There are people who say the Jews control Hollywood. If the Jews control Hollywood, then there are some Jews who are pretty removed from the reality of what it means to be Jewish. And we know there are. You know why? You can stop and think about it for a moment. When I was in Los Angeles last week, I was coming home one night from somewhere and I had to do all sorts of zigzags all over the place because every single street was blocked off because at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, there was the Golden Globe Awards. The Golden Globe Awards is the second largest award evening behind the Academy Awards. Okay. And from what I read, I don't know a single television show that's on TV, so it means absolutely nothing to me. I don't watch American TV or Israeli TV. I have no clue of what's on television. You know, I'm stuck in like All in the Family and Happy Days, if you ask me about TV. So I don't know what's on television now and who wins for what. I have no clue whatsoever. Not on Netflix or on regular TV. I don't know. But I understand that there was the Emmy Awards just yesterday or a day ago or 2 days ago. Okay, most prestigious television awards. Explain to me, if we control Hollywood, how it is that on those 2 evenings, there wasn't a single mention of hostages being held in Gaza. As we know, those award ceremonies are traditionally the platform for actors and actresses who come up to receive awards, right? I remember growing up as a child when Marlon Brando refused to accept an award because he sent a Native American to say he protests, he does not accept the award, right? Because of, and we remember, of course, Vanessa Redgrave, who won an Academy Award for a Holocaust movie. And outside, there were people protesting from the Jewish Defense League. And if you'll remember at the Academy Award, she said, it's unfortunate that this evening and the spirit of this evening has to be ruined by a group of Zionist hoodlums. Remember that? Remember Patty Chayefsky's response when he came out and he said, with all due respect to Vanessa Redgrave, you know, I believe that you're winning an Academy Award is not a matter of global, you know, proportions, and a simple thank you would have been enough. And everybody got up and gave him a standing ovation. This was a historic moment. The Academy Awards are always, or the Golden Globe Awards or the Emmy Awards are always the platform for celebrities in Hollywood to get up and say, I won this award and I dedicate it to the girls of Boko Haram, bring our girls home. Remember Michelle Obama and all those who were at award ceremonies presenting? Did anybody hear anybody say about the fact that there's a baby being held hostage for 3 months now? Was there a word spoken? The hypocrisy of the world. Yet we are the ones defending ourselves in the International Court of Justice with none less than South Africa accusing us of non-humanitarian behavior, of violating the code of genocide and so on. I mean, this is really like, this plot could have only been written by Franz Kafka or George Orwell. This is a dystopian universe where if you read the story of The Trial by Kafka, where Mr. K wakes up and throughout the entire book, he's accused of something and he's on trial and the trial is taking place. And throughout the novel, he doesn't know why he's on trial. What have I done? Nobody tells him. He's just being put on trial and being put on trial for criminal charges and nobody tells him why. That's what it feels like. Or this is an Orwellian universe where a country like Israel is being accused by all these nations of the world of genocide, when indeed the rest of the world violates human rights every day. You don't need a war, let alone the war in Russia, in Ukraine that Russia launched, which is genocide of the worst type, which is intent to kill civilians. It's the direct definition of genocide, is what Putin is doing in Ukraine. Silence. If that's not enough for a double standard. So my friends, all we need to do is to continue to stay strong, to stay united, and to keep reading and studying Pirkei Avot and to understand this is our lifeline, this is our lifeblood, this is our identity. And so I want to wish all of you a good rest of the week. Stay strong. Thank you for all your support, your donations, for all those who continue I see Micha Cohen here, who I know arranged this past Sunday a bike-a-thon for the hostages and generated donations that are going to go to help the families of hostages and others. Do what you can, please. Continue to support all of these efforts, whether it's our own fund with the Sephardic Educational Center or the many, many other good organizations that are doing this good work. Continue to raise awareness and raise your voices. Hollywood is not doing it. The society is forgetting very quickly. In the beginning, there was all this talk. It's now, dissipated. And now what's capturing the headlines is South Africa accusing Israel of genocide. If that's not the most twisted accusation and twisted reality, I don't know what is. But in the face of all that insanity, we say Am Yisrael Chai. We've been through a lot as a Jewish people, and we will continue to be here. We will continue to plow through all of these difficulties and please God this year to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut, the 76th anniversary of Israel. I invite all of you May 10th to 20th to join the Sephardic Educational Center to come here to Israel on a special mission, which is, as we advertise, to come here and give Israel a big hug on Yom HaZikaron and to celebrate in whatever way Israel is going to choose to celebrate in this very difficult year, to celebrate its independence. I encourage you to be here in Israel. Put that on your calendar. You'll get more information. Join us for that because it'll be not only a special time, it'll be historic to be here for this Yom HaZikaron and this Yom Ha'atzmaut. So sending all of you a lot of love and thank you for being with me together. And I look forward to our next time. I'll keep you posted, follow our writings, and sending all of you a lot of good wishes and continue to be in touch. And I'll see you.
Thank you. Thank you,
time.
Rabbi.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Shabbat Tov and all best
Shabbat.
and good news. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, Dave.
Shalom, everyone.
Thank you.